This show is about who will win automatic promotion, make the playoffs and be relegated in these three crazy leagues. Yes, it's our mid-season predictions episode with some wobbly conviction and ideally some friction as we demonstrate our weekly EFL addiction. Welcome to the Not the Top 20 podcast. All right, George?
Very good diction in your rhyme there.
Nice.
Kind of is the same as addiction, isn't it? It doesn't really work. Hi. Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Really well,
Good.
really excited. I think we should get straight into it. It's time for the Championship mid-season predictions, automatics, playoffs, relegation. And we'll start with the top two. Automatically promoted to the Premier League, the promised land, as some call it, but not us. So it sounds like a shambles up in the Premier League. Looks horrible, to be quite frank. And fans of Leeds and Burnley and Sheffield United know that just as well as anyone else. Fans of Sunderland, it's definitely the promised land for them right now. And those are the four teams that are really part of this discussion, as I see it anyway. George, you may disagree. Leeds top of the tree on 53, Burnley and Sheffield United on 52, and Sunderland on 50. I'll throw to you first. Are you still Leeds United win this by 10 points, as was your stance not long ago?
I think Leeds United win the league by a substantial amount of points. It wouldn't surprise me if it was 10. Despite the fact they're only 1 point clear into mid-January. A few reasons for that. I mean, it's quite weird, and I know obviously this didn't happen, but we are, Leeds were 100 on to beat Blackburn before conceding late, they would have been incredibly short before conceding late. The equaliser 1-1, they'd have been incredibly short when they were 3-1 up against Hull before conceding twice. And yet, I know there'll be people out there saying, this is Leeds, this is what they do. They concede when they throw away leads, they throw away opportunities, but overwhelmingly likely in those two positions are the two games that they win those two. And if they win those two, they're 5 points clear. So things can change very quickly, and those two results have kind of skewed the way that the league table looks right now. The key part for me is that through 26 games, they have 53 points. So in terms of the points tally that they're on their way to setting, it's pretty strong. In my mind, Leeds by 10 or Leeds by 8 or Leeds by 6 or whatever I think it will end up being isn't necessarily because I expect Leeds to massively kick on from where they are now. They've only lost 3 games this season. But if you comb through their results so far, it does feel like a lot of the games they haven't won have been their own undoing. And I would expect that to right itself a little bit. But it's more because I'm not entirely sure. I think basically you can look through Sheffield United, where we have to add 2 to their points tally up to this stage, given they had a 2-point deduction to start the season. But I think you can look through Sheffield United, Burnley and Sheffield and Sunderland and make pretty strong cases as to why their PPG may regress a little bit between now and the end of the season. And if that's the case, if Leeds carry on with their performance level, which I think by basically every metric apart from points, they're quite far clear of everyone else in terms of underlying numbers, in terms of the way they dominate games, and the gap between them and their opposition when they do win games too, in my eyes. My guess is that if Leeds continue at the rate they're currently going, they'll win the league and do so fairly comfortably. And if they can stop shooting themselves in the foot and kick on a little bit, then it could be quite some distance between them and the rest.
Yeah, I've got Leeds winning the league. I believe in their dominance, as do you. I can't quite believe that this is true, but they, up to this point, have faced less than 2 shots on target per game. It is like groundbreaking numbers, and obviously that's within the context of Burnley's goals conceded column looking healthier, and Burnley being the ones posting groundbreaking, potentially record-breaking defensive numbers. But I probably believe, for example, if you were to say from here until the end of the season, the last 20 games, who do I think will concede fewer goals, Leeds or Burnley? I probably believe in Leeds' defence more than Burnley's, which might seem crazy to some. But on the other end of the pitch, well, they've scored 9 goals more than Sunderland, 12 more than Sheffield United, 17 more than Burnley. And obviously the Meslier situation isn't great. We talked about it last week. We both believe that something needs to change, whether Meslier gets dropped for Carl Darlow, who obviously played in the Cup over the weekend, or whether they look to sign a goalkeeper. But that issue, if you like, seems to get discussed as if the other teams don't also have issues or weaknesses. And actually, I think an individual issue like this, compared to something on a team level, like chance creation being too low or a poor defence, is a lot easier to solve than those sort of things. So I got Leeds winning the league. Now, in second place,
quickly on Meslier as well, I do think there's an element where what happened at Hull might have end up being a net positive, given that it's happened at the beginning of January. It's happened before FA Cup weekend, allowing them to bring Darlow in without much fanfare. I would be pretty surprised if Melié's between the sticks again come the weekend in the league game. So maybe, even if they don't bring in a keeper, it's kind of brought the situation to a head at quite an opportune moment.
Yeah, for second place, going up with Leeds, I think, weirdly, stronger than my stance of who it actually is. I think my strongest opinion is that I don't think it will be Burnley. That defensive record, as discussed, is a really nice crutch. It's an amazing foundation, and it's absolutely fair to use that as reasoning for Burnley finishing in the top two, because it is quite blinding. But Sheffield United and Sunderland have excellent defensive records as well, both conceding well below 1 goal a game. So Burnley's defensive record is incredible and gives them a great chance to win points, no doubt about that. But it's not necessarily as big a thing compared to the other teams that they're fighting for with promotion. And on the other end of the pitch, they have failed to score in over a third of their league games so far this season, Burnley. And their scoring rate might have touched up a tiny bit over the last few weeks. Fleming has come to the party, where previously it was only really Brownhill. But I don't think they are, creating like huge amounts more than normal, and certainly not at the rate of your average automatically promoted Championship team. You've got Trafford in goal, having the season, one of the best shot-stopping seasons that the Championship has seen. An 85% save percentage is insane. Goalkeeper shot-stopping metrics can fluctuate quite like extremely, down to things like confidence, defensive shape, communication with players in front of him if there are absences. So it's the sort of thing that I think might not continue. And obviously Parker seems to have made a deal with the devil that allows him to win Championship promotion every time he's in this division. But the fact that he's done it before, it's just not as big a factor for me as some other things are. So the face that you made when I said I don't think it will be Burnley makes me think that you do think it will be Burnley.
Yeah, I've got Burnley in second, and I totally take on board what you're saying about both the attacking output and the unsustainable nature of their defensive record. If we were to, if whilst we're recording right now, there's a tweet put out saying that James Trafford has agreed to move to Newcastle, I'd probably ask you to hit stop and then we can go back and record this again, because obviously he's playing a huge part in this, and it's. If you put James Trafford in goal for Leeds and you put Eli Melié in goal for Burnley, they'd probably be separated by half the table, as ridiculous as both of their kind of shot-stopping statistics so far this season. But I think he'll stay. I don't see why now, given the season that he's having. He's en route to set records in terms of clean sheets and goals conceded in a single season. His stock isn't going to drop at all by staying at the club, I don't believe, even if they don't go up. And it feels to me like he could probably secure a better move and ensure that he's playing first-team football rather than coming in mid-season somewhere by waiting until the summer. So I anticipate he'll stay, and I think that Burnley will. My
point was less about him potentially leaving and
no.
more about the nature of his incredible shot-stopping performance maybe being unsustainable, even though he is excellent.
But even if, say, he was to regress to his own mean, right? Say he goes from being an elite, ridiculous, once-in-a-lifetime shot-stopper to being just a good keeper. It's not like they are, we often see with some teams when they've got posting good defensive numbers, they're actually kind of middle of the road for XG against. Like Burnley are still conceding few chances and few big chances. It's not like that, if he turns into an average keeper, they're going to start shipping plenty of goals within games. And it's their kind of very solid defensive foundations that even if they aren't sustained, give me belief that they're the kind of the best bet just to truck along, really, because they're always in games that they barely concede anything. I mean, it's an interesting time to be recording this because Friday night is huge, where Burnley hosts Sunderland, and that is going to have a massive bearing on where this promotion race goes. Where Burnley will obviously be favourites for that game, given they're at home. Their home record is so strong. Also, it's worth pointing out that in terms of fixture, the way the fixtures have fallen for Burnley this season, it's if you consider away games against the best teams in the league as being the hardest games you're going to face all season. They've already played Leeds, Sheffield United, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, West Brom, Blackburn, Bristol City, Sheffield Wednesday and Norwich away from home. So of the top 11, it's only Watford you're looking at as a team they haven't played away from home, which means that over their most difficult games left to go this season, basically 9 out of 10 of them are at Turf Moor, where they've been so strong. And that's significant because that doesn't tally across with Sheffield United and Sunderland. I've got immense respect for both of them, but Sunderland, on the other hand, they've only played one team away from home in the top 6, and that was Sheffield United. which they lost 1-0. So they've still got to go to Leeds, still got to go to Burnley, still got to go to Borough, still got to go to Baggies. And at this stage of the season, to have that big a swing between the two is fairly significant. So
yeah,
it wouldn't surprise me any of the three at all. I think January is going to be very interesting. The fact that Burnley are in for Morgan Whittaker is a sign to me that they're going to look to spend. Whether Whittaker is a good signing or not is up for debate given his current form. But and I know you question how much January signings, what impact they can actually have on a window. But yeah, also in terms of personnel, even though we know it's the case, there's no reason why a team with Sarmiento, with Brownhill, Foster coming back from injury is important as well. Jayden Anthony, why they should be so toothless from an attacking perspective. And we've also seen recently with them going to Bramall Lane, where Blades generally don't get beat, going there, being the better side, winning 2-0 fairly comfortably. So, again, wouldn't surprise me any of the three, but at this moment, I think Burnley look the most likely.
So, I find it very difficult to pick between Sunderland and Sheffield United for second spot. I think with Blades, due to Wilder basically and the way that this team plays in his image, something we've talked about quite a lot in the last few weeks, certainly with Colin Murray, but also between ourselves, they have some very tempting intangibles, don't they, Sheffield United? Grit, bloody-minded will. They are in the image of their manager. That was on show in beating Watford last time out. Really impressive, stretched in terms of who was available and big players being injured, but they got over the line. Of course, they hadn't won their previous 3 games and they'd lost games to promotion rivals before then. They got new owners, so there might be some transfer business to support Wilder. Obviously, Britt and Diaz has been heavily linked, for example. For me, it's just a little bit, as much as I like Wilder's rallying cry after the Watford game, and I do believe in his ability to performing to their absolute maximum, I do think it's a bit early in the season for a team gunning for automatic promotion to seem this kind of stretched and exhausted and like straining every sinew for a 2-1 away win at Watford, and I think they do look like that at the moment. So that might ease off as players come back from injury, but I do think that the level of points return, I think it's hard to imagine that they will get back to that point over another long period of time. They have got, to be fair, most of their tough fixtures out the way, and they do have 2 more home games to play than they do away games. They've been excellent at Bramall Lane this season, so really difficult, but I'm all in on Sunderland. I think that they are the best side of the 3, to be honest, and I think that they may have another level as well, and that's not just linked to the addition of Enzo Lafay, the signing from Roma on loan, someone who previously playing under Régis Lebris in Ligue 1 was considered one of the best midfielders, one of the best young players, but outside of youth, just one of the best players in the division, and someone who could add a lot to Sunderland's midfield, which I think is great. I just like their balance all over the pitch, Sunderland. They've obviously got a couple of injuries off the left-hand side at the moment. They've tweaked a little bit with Mayenda and Isidore, but that seems to have worked fairly well. I think they're better in attack than Burnley and Sheffield United, and I think in the second half of the season, where teams will get more defensive against these sides than they have been in the first half of the season, that could be quite a big factor. I think the other teams might find it a little bit more difficult to break teams down and score goals. And yes, as I mentioned, they might be the worst defensively of these 4 that we're talking about, but they still concede less than a goal a game at 0.85 goals per 90, so it's not something that hugely trips them up, I wouldn't say. So yeah, I'm on the Sunderland train. It's exciting to me that we, as we'll call ourselves now, those of us on the Sunderland train, are seen as the 4th most likely to win the league, and certainly the outsiders here with the bookmakers to finish in the top 2. I like being on the underdog. We're under the radar, and that's where we like to be. So you've gone for Leeds and Burnley. I've gone for Leeds and Sunderland to win automatic promotion. In the playoff places, here's what the picture looks like. Middlesbrough are 5th on 41, West Brom 6th on 40, Blackburn 7th on 39 with a game in hand over almost all around them. Bristol City back on 37 with Watford and Sheffield Wednesday. Watford have played a game fewer. Norwich are 11th on 36, Swansea 12th on 34. Then you get to QPR on 32, and that's 8 points off the playoffs. So that's where we'll cut it for now. But I should say we've got Millwall and Preston on 30 and Coventry City on 29, 11 points off the playoffs at the moment. I've got Burnley and Sheffield United in my playoff quad for fairly obvious reasons, and I think that they will be desperately difficult to get past across 2 legs, those 2 teams, for whoever does make it into 5th and 6th, as I see it. Who have you got finishing in 5th and 6th? Talk me through the board a little bit.
Are you assuming I've got both Sunderland and Sheffield United? Because I do. So they're third and fourth, or in any order. Middlesbrough are one who looked to me kind of best set to go and challenge Leeds not so long ago, but have undergone a really poor. Well, just been hard to beat, but since losing 3-1 away at Leeds, they've only won 2 of their next 6 games. Both of those are 1-0, drawn the other 4, and that has kind of really taken the wind out of their sails in terms of them kind of trying to fly up towards the top 4. But even so, they should have too much quality, I think, to kind of fall away completely. They still certainly look to me the best team of the rest to kick on. I've left Baggies out, which is, I guess, a bit controversial, in part because Carlos Corberán, despite the form arguably even improving since Corberán left the club, and with an appointment of Vicky looking pretty impressive given his calibre, having previously managed in Switzerland. I don't know enough about him to be like, this is an incredible appointment. We've got to side with them, and I still view probably Corberán as being quite a difficult person to take a job on from, because he's very particular in the way that he does things. His style of play is very different, I would say, to most managers at this level. What he demands of you will be relatively different, and maybe it's not a massive surprise that after he left Huddersfield, they churned through about 6 managers and got relegated not long after, but having taken them pretty close to the Premier League. So that's just enough caution for me just to not, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he comes in and they're brilliant and they fill up the league, but I'm not going to hang my hat on them. I've sided with Blackburn for kind of similar reasons, I guess, to Burnley, where I think we know now that under John Eustace they are going to be really hard to break down. They're going to be very, very solid, and therefore they're never really going to be out of games. And that's important when you're trying to amass a points tally to take you into a top 6. And again, there is a fixture argument here where their home form this season against teams who are relatively who are in the bottom end of the table is pretty good. And with their home games left this season, they've only got 1 home game left from teams currently in the top 8, and that is Middlesbrough. They've still got to play Argyle at home, Cardiff at home, Pompey at home, Coventry at home, Preston at home, Millwall at home, all teams in the bottom half. And if they pick up points at a kind of similar rate as they have been doing against those kind of sides, where they've already beaten Bristol City, Swansea, QPR, Oxford, Derby and Luton all at home, then that could well be enough to take them into it. I have some, after a very good start to the season, his goal scoring exploits have dropped off a little bit. Also, Max Gay, whilst he's looked at times effective, but not necessarily a genuine goal scorer. I worry they may not quite have the firepower needed to do this. But I think in Todd Cantwell they have a player that is A, one of the most talented players in the league anyway, and B, is seemingly improving week on week and is one of the best creative players, and himself a big goal threat too. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Cantwell is the main man for his side to have a very good second half of the season. So yeah, they're my 4: Borough, Blackburn, Sheffield United and Sunderland.
I've got Borough, but it doesn't feel great at the moment. I really believe they are leaking a bit of air, well, quite a lot of air actually. I think their performance level has dropped off without a shadow of a doubt in the last month, 2 months. They seem much less sure of themselves, a bit vulnerable basically right this second. And I like you, was of the opinion quite until fairly recently that Borough are probably the second best team in the league, and now I definitely don't think that. I am keeping them in the top 6 because of where they are currently, comfy in 5th with a good points cushion, but also just benefit of the doubt really based on the last 2.5 seasons, the quality of their play at their best, the chance of them and the likelihood of them probably weighing in fairly heavily in January if they feel like they need to. I do think they can right the ship, but I'm certainly less bullish on them as I would have been. West Brom, like you, I'd like to take them on, and a lot of it similar to you, down to Corberán. I don't think the team's been playing that well anyway for the last couple of months, and you might see that as a positive. Maybe a new manager can come in and reignite things. I think Blackburn and Bristol City are solid. I kind of see them fairly similarly, teams with fairly low floor, but certainly not the highest ceilings in this group. I think both of them will set a solid pace. Is it quite a playoff pace? I'm not sure. I think a team with a higher ceiling can get above them. So as I go through the rest of the teams, see if you can guess who I'm going to say. Wednesday and Watford are the next in the league table. Both of them, I think, are volatile on and off the pitch. Both of them have very variable performance levels. And then off the field, well, you've got Danny Röhl, poking the bear when it comes to his owner, very unsubtly showing his distaste at the way that the transfer strategy is being put together for January, and almost calling on the fans to really heap the pressure on Mr. Chanziri. And while I think I'm certainly Team Röhl versus Team Chanziri, I do think the situation therefore is quite volatile, because that man as a decision maker has been that. And then at Watford, cleverly, reportedly under some pressure. Sunday night there was a Watford podcast / Twitter account reporting that he was under pressure and calling on the fans to basically flood the club's email address with messages of support for Tom Cleverley. We mentioned it the other day. He's going to be a victim of his own early season success. And the vibe around Watford right this second is all too familiar from the last couple of seasons. They are, to my eyes, slipping and sliding, and I don't think the way that the decision makers operate, and I don't think that the patience of the fans is at an all-time low with those operators. And I think there's potential kind of meltdown, as there was last season when they flew down the table from this point. QPR, Millwall and Preston, I just don't really see putting together the sort of run that would be needed to make up the ground. And I quite like Swansea, but they just seem to have a bit of a cap on them as well at the moment. They'll look good going forward for one game and then poor for 2 or 3. Quite an interesting one. 11 points to make up in 20 games is too many, even if their underlying numbers are still pretty amazing. Norwich were 13th and made the playoffs. So Sunderland were in the top 6 when we did the mid-season predictions, and they finished in the bottom half at the time of recording, and they were 5 points off. Here they are 11th, 4 points off, and I'm predicting another strong second half of the season and another playoff appearance for Norwich City. I think they're a big player still in the Championship, even if it doesn't scream it when you look at the league table. I think they are the team of this group with the highest ceiling, the best team at their best, is another way of putting at it. Now, their worst is definitely worse than Blackburn's and Bristol City's, and we have up to this point seen it too often. But I think if you peek under the hood, if you look at the underlying numbers, they've been trending upwards all season, and that's especially impressive when you consider that Sargent has been injured, and I think he's one of the best strikers in the division, and he's back from injury now. I think this is a case, I think there are signs anyway, that this is a case where the process, if you like, the changes that Torup is putting in place are elevating the team slowly but surely, without the results necessarily popping off, and I think they can and will at some point. They've got quality in their squad, no doubt about that, even with the Saints ban of 6 games. I'm ignoring that for the moment. I think they could get going and make it, so I'm going to pick Norwich to finish 6th. On the ball, City. Championship relegation. I mean, this is so hard, isn't it? Because of managerial changes. Like, in the last 2 or 3 weeks alone, Oxford, Hull, Stoke, Luton, Plymouth. We've got Gary Rowett coming in and getting 10 points from 4 games. We've got Ruben Sayes, who we think is the next coming of Pep Guardiola after your interview with him last week on the YouTube channel and the pod feed. We've got Mark Robbins in at Stoke, one of the best managers the Championship's seen in the last few years. Luton, we don't know. Argyle have turned to Miron Muslic, who doesn't have any experience in the Championship, but comes with some pretty good references from Belgium. Cardiff, I think, are probably likely to make another change at some point. Obviously, Rowett's had his strong start, which has made Oxford fly up the table. The others we don't really know yet. So dices, George, are being rolled, but we don't know what numbers they're going to land on. Can you see the future here?
That's not a threat. That's the plural for dices. My 3 going down are Plymouth Argyle, because I think it's almost impossible not to have them there, regardless of how positive you are about the Muslic appointment. Of course, last season we saw 2 foreign managers of very, very different profiles to each other and very different profiles to Muslic come into the Championship and take 2 teams who are basically destined for relegation in Sheffield Wednesday and QPR and keep them up comfortably. That doesn't necessarily mean that Muslic is going to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean that Muslic isn't going to do that. But what it does probably mean is that those out there saying this is a bad appointment purely because he hasn't got any Championship experience, it doesn't really make a difference. It isn't really necessarily the case, albeit it maybe comes with more risk than, let's say, a Gary Rowett at Oxford. The performances away from home aren't good enough. I would also probably say that a 1-0 away win at Brentford in the FA Cup might not be the best thing for their survival aspirations.
I was wondering how you were going to turn that into a negative. That's impressive. That's impressive. Their first away win of the season, the happiest day of the season so far, and it's not necessarily a good thing.
Well, they've cost me a few quid. But as a fan of a team trying to stay up in the Championship, when I got the alert that we were 3-1 down against Exeter, my first thought was very much, okay, we can forget about that now and focus on what we need, the task at hand. But yeah, I mean, obviously he could turn it around. I'm very intrigued to see what it's going to be like tomorrow night as they host Oxford, and what is just a huge game. Like, I think if they get beat at home part by Oxford, then we're going to be looking at incredibly short prices for their relegation. My next two, I mean, I haven't relegated either Oxford or Pompey. Oxford because I think under Rowett and with the points gap that is now there between the relegation zone and Oxford, and again a manager who we kind of know what we're going to get. He's done this before. You can probably rely on him to ensure that the performance level is high enough in order to yield a fairly consistent points tally. And again, fully in the knowledge that the plan from Oxford is to very much attack this transfer window rather than let it fritter away. And with Pompey, I think their home performances recently have been really, really impressive and really strong. And again, if they maintain that level of performance at home, I think they'll get the requisite points needed to stay up. I'm pretty low on Cardiff. It is right now, I think the performance levels have been relatively poor, especially away from home for quite a long time. They're currently in the relegation zone. And when you consider the managerial changes that have been made by other clubs, you look at whether it's Ruben Sellers coming into Hull, I definitely think we'll turn that around now. And we also know are going to be aggressive in this window, and other ones. With Cardiff, it doesn't really feel like it's had the necessary impact. Whether there'll be another one, we'll have to see. But I kind of feel like maybe the managers you want for this task are kind of being snapped up elsewhere. And I just haven't seen the improvement needed yet in order to suggest they're going to get out of it. And I've actually got Luton as my third one, which might be a bit of a shock. But it shouldn't be. I don't understand why it's a shock. Like, I don't really get it. This is a club whose malaise has been very obvious to anyone watching for all season, apart from me for about 3 weeks where I got a bit carried away. But it's the performance levels have been amongst the worst in the league all season. There is no signs of improvement whatsoever. Whilst Rob Edwards is the person who paid the price for their poor form, I personally don't really think that he was the issue. I don't think there was a toxicity at the club because of him. I don't think that his coaching methods were really poor. And right now, at the time of recording, it may not come to pass, but at 1:30 on Monday afternoon, Matt Bloomfield is the 10-on favourite with the bookies to get this job. And even though I really rate Matt Bloomfield, and I think that he would be an exciting appointment, it feels massively like an appointment to me that stinks of complacency from Luton. To an extent where it's like, well, we're hiring a young up-and-coming manager who's proven that given time he can sort things out. But are you playing the situation? Are you bringing in someone who has a track record of coming in and immediately turning things around? Like, think back this time a year ago when Luton were in a really strong position to try and stay up in the Premier League. They looked like the most likely promoted team staying up, and Matt Bloomfield was having to firefight for his job at Wycombe. For a year later, for him to take on this job with them at the bottom end of the Championship, it's an incredible turnaround from him in terms of what he's done and the amazing job that he's done at Wycombe Wanderers. But it's also shown the trajectory of where Luton are going. And by failing to make an appointment, in my mind, that maybe accepts the position that they're in, it feels to me like a decision that's being made that doesn't stink of we are in a relegation fight and we need to make sure we get over the line. And that worries me. And again, because of his relative inexperience, because he's never managed in the Championship before, I worry that he won't be afforded the kind of time needed, especially by the fan base, in order to turn it around, where we can already see the kind of the way that it will be reported if things don't improve immediately. So there seems to be a lot of thinking here that Luton are too good to go down and the players are too good and everything else, but I'm seeing no evidence of that in the performances, and I really worry about them going forward. So yeah, it's a strange one where even though I like Bloomfield as a manager, and if I was calling the shots at a mid-table Championship side, he'd probably be the first person I'd want to speak to. I'm not quite sure if right now in this position it's the best appointment in the circumstances for either for Bloomfield himself or for Luton.
I've got Argyle finishing bottom. I am pretty interested in the appointment that they've made. We had a really great message on NTT20 Squad from Ben, who's an Argyle fan, who made some excellent points about why they might have gone down this path rather than take what looked like the obvious approach of rehiring Steven Schumacher, who's obviously out of a job at the moment and would have been very popular with the fan base. Ben writing that he reckons the decision is largely down to the board deciding to pursue and embrace a squad that will be mostly recruited from abroad. You don't have to look that deep into Argyle's recruitment, certainly in the last 2 or 3 windows, to see that they are the club, and perhaps it's not surprising given the way that they operate from the very top and the way that Simon Hallett looks at things like decision making and value and doing things a little bit differently and dare I say smarter sometimes. Obviously it hasn't looked great in the last year or so with the managerial recruitments, but if you set that to one side, do we think that there is extra value shopping abroad given the costs that come with signing players within the pyramid, particularly when you are a team like Argyle who aren't going to be able to compete with the teams in your division, either financially and in some cases geographically? If you're trying to pluck the best players from League One, they're probably not going to go to Argyle either, because the likelihood is they will have offers from elsewhere. So I say all that to say that, you look at the players that they've signed in Baidu, Al-Haj, Pushash, the defender, as well, and this is a guy in Muslic who maybe we don't know this, but given that he himself is not from the UK, might have a better time managing those players. I think that logic stands up. Whether it will come true, we will see. And also his style of play, which I think is quite it's one of those where I don't think he's that interested in having the ball, which is no bad thing, I think, for the position that they're in. But that's not to say he's just defend deep and hope for the best. There's aggression in the out of possession shape. There's a quick counter-attacking style when things have been good in his teams before, notably at Cercle Bruges. So I'm kind of interested to see how this goes. But at the end of the day, for them to stay up, they need to get above 3 teams. It's easy to look at the league table and go, oh, they're only 3 points off safety. But that misses the fact that it's not, they have to just get above one team that's 3 places ahead of them. They need to get over 3 teams, and I don't think that is likely, because you can make a case, I think, for any of the clubs around them staying up as well. As discussed, the new managerial hires make this really, really difficult, because even if you take Portsmouth, for example, here's why it affects them. They're not changing their manager, so why should they worry about everyone else changing their manager? Because it is contingent on how many of them do well or badly. Portsmouth's chances of survival is contingent on that, right? You focus on yourself, Pompey, and how many points you can collect. But it's not just that dictates whether you stay up or not. It's about how the other teams around you do as well. And last year was the best example of it, and you mentioned it already when we sat here and did mid-season predictions. Last year, QPR and Wednesday were both in the bottom 3. And they finished their season from that point with a playoff and a mid-table level, miles away from it. And 2 teams got sucked in. One of them was Birmingham. Now, some quite nuts stats that I saw when looking back at last year, and I don't have them to hand, annoyingly. They're in the wrong document, and I can't be bothered to pull it up as I speak. But this is quite nuts to me, and this underlines the point that I'm making. It's not just about you and your points return. When we recorded the mid-season predictions, people might think that Birmingham were in the bottom 3 already because Rooney had been a disaster. Not the case. Birmingham were not in the bottom 3. They were something like 19th or 20th, just outside. From that point, in the last 20-odd games, where they had Mowbray and then they had Rowett, they didn't have a bottom 3 points return. They had like a 17th or 18th points return. So how can you be 20th at the halfway point, get the 18th most points and get relegated? Because it's about what the other teams around you do. So that's what makes this really, really difficult to work out. I've got Argyle going down. I don't think they can get above 3 teams. I've got Cardiff going down like yourself. I think that the chickens come home to roost now for Cardiff. I've talked at length for two years now. I think the bottom of the Championship is getting stronger because I think clubs' decision-making is better. The decisions they make in recruitment and squad building and managerial hires, the level has improved significantly, and Cardiff haven't moved with it. Consistently poor decision-making in terms of managerial decisions and squad building, and their ownership makes poor decisions, in my opinion. I'd expect them to make another managerial change, and I wouldn't bet on them getting it right. I've got Cardiff to go down in the bottom 3, and I've got Derby to go down with them. Derby are 4 points above it at the moment. They've actually got the best goal difference of any of the teams in the bottom 8 places. I think there's been a lot to admire about the first half of Derby's seasons in the context of their promotion from League One, but they've not got as many points as I thought they had, to be quite honest with you. And I'm not really sure the squad is particularly good, and I'm not sure how much scope they have to make it significantly better in this window. And they play quite an intense style, and I wonder if they can maintain those levels. And really what I'm leading to say, kind of begrudgingly, is that I don't always believe in Paul Warne's management under pressure. And yes, this is an availability bias thing. We've seen him get relegated from this division many times with Rotherham. But I think even outside of that, even in the times Rotherham won promotion from League One, even in his time at Derby so far, I've seen things when things have got tough, when winless runs set in, when things are difficult. I think his manner is amazing. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I love him as a man and as a manager. But I don't always feel confident in him to get his teams out of big trouble if they're in it. And that might be unfair, but it's how I feel. Derby in the bottom three for me. So difficult to pick who goes down from the Championship. I mean, Stoke and Mark Robbins, I guess we're just assuming he gets them out of it. You've gone with Luton going down. Hull are in the bottom three, and neither of us have really mentioned them as an option, expecting them to go pretty big in the transfer window. And obviously Ruben Sayes, we think has made quite a good impact and could probably have a bigger one from this point. So I guess, I should mention Millwall. Could they get dragged into it? Currently 7 points above it. We've seen gaps like that be swallowed up before, but it would have to be a disastrous regime from Alex Neil. Same with Preston and Hecky. They seem fairly bulletproof, I'd say, against relegation. And then Coventry under Frank Lampard. They're 6 points off it. They can't afford to have a really bleak few months, but I don't think anyone's necessarily expecting it, just because quality in the squad and good underlying numbers.
I think they're an interesting one where it wouldn't be a massive surprise if Coventry were to be the side that came out of the pack either way, where the underlying numbers have been so good all season. And we know the quality of the squad if they went on a run. But similarly, I think that the results and performances have trended pretty badly in the last couple of weeks. There still have to be massive question marks about Frank Lampard's aptitude to manage at the level, assisted by Joe Edwards and not Jody Morris, which is a change, of course, from the Derby days. And they're not miles clear of it. And again, if things don't improve relatively soon, then it wouldn't be a huge shock for me if they suddenly realise they're in more trouble than they thought they were.
Okay, so yeah, plenty to think about. Some things we're excited about, some things I'm already nervous about. These are predictions where you guys are going to remember the bad ones and we're only going to remember the good ones. I've got Leeds and Sunderland in the top two. I've got Sheffield United and Burnley joined by Middlesbrough and Norwich for a playoff quartet. And going down, I've got Plymouth Argyle, I've got Cardiff, and I've got Derby County. What about yourself?
Yeah, Leeds and Burnley, my top two. Sheffield United, Sunderland, Borough and Blackburn, my playoff teams. Relegation, Plymouth Argyle, Cardiff City and Luton Town. And before we move on to League One, shout out Argyle. That win at Brentford was magnificent. They showed a defensive shape and organisation and zeal that they just haven't shown at all, particularly on the road this season. It was their first away win of the whole season. Absolutely incredible to do it at Brentford, a team with such a strong home record in the Premier League, of course. Brentford themselves have a bit of a weird relationship with cup competitions where it really seems like they just don't care. But even so many good players on the pitch, and Argyle deserved their win. I think even if the winner came from range, Morgan Whittaker getting one right for the first time in a couple of months, where he's been fairly profligate and wasteful from those situations. And from the extended highlights, it just looked like a really coherent performance, and I think that's exciting. Credit should go to Kevin Nanskival, who's just part of the furniture, isn't he? Such a popular man at the club, Mr. Argyle, really. And his post-match interview was absolutely magnificent. The scenes with the players and the fans in the corner celebrating, magnificent. And there was the new man, Muslic, sitting in the stands, loving it, filming on his phone, seemingly really buying into special atmosphere within the fan base. And what could that mean for them from here on out? Let's see.